It's a racing legend, the American take on the Defender, the Mustang's off-road cousin, the Ford Bronco.
Absolutely not.
In 1961, the International Scout proved that there was a market for the off-road capability of a Jeep combined with the comfort of a pickup into a single vehicle. Nowadays, we call it an SUV, so Mustang creators Lee Iacocca and Donald Frey took it upon themselves to design an off-road vehicle for Ford that does those same criteria. It had to be comfortable enough for a trip to the town, but unlike modern compact SUVs, it actually was designed to work off-road. It's not just a little gimmick you put on the commercials for 30 seconds. That's why it was only offered in four-wheel drive, and it had optional heavy-duty suspension, and the body reflected this as well as simple, economic, rugged, square body lines. And it also must be the only SUV in history to pull off a convertible. I'm looking at you, Land Rover. And to top it all off, you can get with an optional 302 cubic inch V8 making 200 horsepower, which isn't great, but for 1966 in an SUV, that's pretty good. And since it was just 2 years after the launch of the Mustang, designed by the guys who made the Mustang, it was fantastic. It was a sales sensation. It was so good and so iconic. It is still being modified today. It's a legend. I don't really like SUVs. I think a lot of people, including myself, have expressed their disdain for these vehicles. But the Bronco is freaking awesome. It's got the opposite of the Mustang logo, so instead of a Mustang galloping across the plains, it's got a Mustang, I think, kicking is the only word you can describe for that. Because, you know, it's very aggressive in your face. Mustang's more of a sports car. This is a V8 powered off-road SUV. Sort of fits the criteria. I love this thing. The original Bronco looks fantastic. And it's still being modified today, as I mentioned. And that's partially due to its racing success. A race car builder named Bill Strout partnered with the legendary NASCAR team Holman Moody to modify Broncos for the brutal Baja 1000 endurance rally race. I know it wasn't called the Baja 1000 back then, but it evolved into that title. And sure enough, they scored their first wins for a 4x4 in 1968 and 1969, but they were not the only ones because Parnelli Jones of Trans Am fame turned the Bronco into a monster. That might just be one of the most famous SUVs of all time, not just a Bronco. Big Ollie. They cut the original Bronco's weight by half a ton to under 2,700 pounds. The Windsor V8 was boosted up to 390 horsepower, and the entire roof was one massive wing. They won back-to-back Baja 1000 in 1971 and 1972, with their time in 1971 of just under 15 hours, would stand for 5 years. It was an incredible achievement. If the International Scout proved that there was a market, the Bronco perfected the formula. It was an icon. It still is an icon. The same cannot be said about the second gen, though. While the original Bronco lasted for a whopping 11 years in its same state. This one only lasted 2 years, because it was enlarged by nearly 12 inches and gained half a ton of weight because for some reason, they stuck it on their aging F-100 platform. Realizing the bizarre size expansion, Ford scaled down the third gen in 1980 to the minimum size of a full-size SUV, and then released the Bronco 2 compact SUV, which we'll come back to in just a bit. To be honest though, the third, fourth, and fifth generation Broncos were but shadows of the original first generation icon, and it showed. By 1991, only 25,000 were being sold a year. That's not good for one of the big three. The only notable thing that happened to the Bronco between 1978 and 1996 was, of course, a car chase, led by one O.J. Simpson. Recently acquitted, definitely not a murderer, O.J. Simpson was spotted driving down LA Freeway I-5 with a gun to his head. It can only be described as a Blues Brothers-like scenario. 20-plus cop cars and 9 helicopters followed the white Bronco daintily down the freeway at 35 miles an hour to his home. It went on for 2 hours. It went on for so long that one of the news choppers following it actually ran out of fuel, which was a problem for that station particularly, because over 95 million people watched the chase. For reference, only 90 million people watched the Super Bowl that year. Now, O.J. eventually peacefully surrendered and was arrested for the trial of the century, but believe it or not, the accused murderer was not the most dangerous thing that day. It was the Bronco. Or at least the Bronco 2. As the age of the SUV began to arrive in the 1980s, the design process was accelerated to meet customer demand. And by accelerated, I mean they simply threw a tall, high-riding body on an existing, usually truck, chassis, and frame. You don't need to be an engineer to realize that significantly raises the center of gravity, increasing the likelihood of a rollover. In fact, during early testing in 1982 on the Ranger platform, shared between both the Bronco 2 and the Explorer, they found that it was so unstable, Ford had to remove certain handling tests in order to ensure their driver's safety. Now, in fairness to Ford, they did commission a 100-page internal assessment in response to the chronic instability, a document that magically shrank to 47 pages as the years went by after it went public. The report was pretty damning. In order to resolve the instability, the track width had to be widened by 4 inches, which cost $83 a vehicle. Now, it sounds pretty cheap, but to be honest, in fairness, it's not. That's $83 times 500,000 plus different vehicles. Ford saw that eye-watering price and decided to widen the platform by 0.4 of an inch, and lower the tire pressure as low as possible. Now, that works absolutely fine, except for the fact that lowering the tire pressure causes a higher probability of tire blowouts. And when you combine that with a vehicle that wants to fall over at just 30 miles an hour, you get a death trap. Actual numbers vary, but between 800 and 4,000 people died between the Bronco 2 and the Explorer, plus thousands more injured. As the lawsuits and the scrutiny built up, Ford decided to stab their partner of 100 years, Firestone Tires, right in the back. In fact, Congress opened up hearings about this, where a lengthy legal battle ensued, where Ford paid people to lie to the investigative committee, and they somehow managed to convince Congress that it was Firestone's entire fault, that blowouts were the cause, not Ford's shady dealings. To be honest, there were no winners in this situation. Not only did hundreds of people die, Ford was charged billions of dollars in reparations and refitting the platform, but the worst casualty was arguably Firestone. It nearly bankrupted the entire company and permanently damaged their reputation. Even to this day, right now, there are people who still refuse to buy Firestone tires because of the misinformation spread at that congressional hearing. I guess some things never change. Fast forward 20 years after lawsuits are wrapped up, and we got the 6th generation Bronco in 2021. In fact, we got 2 new Broncos, the Bronco and the Bronco Sport, just like the Bronco and the Bronco 2 in the 80s. Now, the Bronco Sport is the baby version, which is a terrible little crossover, but the Bronco, that's legit. And it was launched on OJ's birthday, coincidentally. The 2021 Bronco is a true success of the first gen. It's pretty awesome. Available as a 2-door or a 4-door, it's comfy on the road and brutal on the trails. Ironically, once again based on the Ranger platform, but it's a different Ranger that's not deadly, at least not yet. It features full-time 4-wheel drive, an optional manual transmission, and a 330 horsepower EcoBoost V6. But most importantly, it's got heavy-duty, off-road independent suspension with nearly a foot of ground clearance. I mean, the front sway bar can even disconnect to allow for more articulation when rock crawling. And that's just the base model. If you want a pure off-road SUV, from Ford anyway, the Wildtrak is your answer. The 37-inch off-road tires are some of the biggest ever fitted to a road car. And then there's the GOAT all-terrain management system. That is the actual name, although it stands for Goes Over Any Terrain, not Mountain Goat or Greatest of All Time, although I'm sure the marketing department had a field day coming up with that acronym. The system can calibrate throttle response, transmission shifting, power split, and more depending on the surface and how fast you're going on it. You can even download the Trail Map software, which allows you to record your trail run and vehicle telemetry during your run before uploading it to the cloud. And yes, like any good Bronco, there are a whole lot of customization things you can add to it and take off of it. You can take parts off of it just like a Jeep, just like the original. It is awesome. And they're apparently going to make it even more awesomer because there's a Bronco Raptor coming. And I'm expecting it to be a beast because the Raptor is a beast. And if you have a Bronco Raptor, that's just a marriage made in heaven. In fact, the only thing the Broncos can't seemingly do is race. It is nowhere near as successful as the first generation. The only race it entered in, the 2020 Baja 1000, had its Bronco R race truck DNF with engine trouble. Obviously, they're still working on the kinks, and nothing is truly successful on the first try, not even the first generation. But I don't really care, because for the first time in a long time, I actually like an SUV. That is a very small list, shared with the G-Wagon, the Mitsubishi Pajero Evo, and the Land Rover Defender, the old ones. Those are the main few that I can think of that are still modern that I like. And the Bronco is on that list. The look has really grown on me. It actually cares about its heritage. It's not like, I don't know, the Blazer. It's all around a great vehicle. And yeah, a true successor to that first-gen icon.